Here is where it all started. This is a coffin from the Middle Kingdom period in the region of Asyut. 4,000 years ago, a priest of Anubis would have placed the mummified body of a nobleman, or a member of his family, inside this coffin, before lowering them into the subterranean crypt under their tomb, which had been cut into the desert rocks. These coffins are remarkable, not only for their artwork and level of detail, but because inside, on the lid of the coffin, is a chart showing the movements of the stars. This is the first conclusive evidence that the ancient Egyptians devoted considerable energy to making astronomical observations. But how do we decipher these charts, and what do they mean? The first people to study these coffin lids in detail were Austrian mathematician Otto Neugebauer and American Egyptologist Richard Parker. In 1960, they published 3 volumes on the topic of Egyptian astronomy, titled Egyptian Astronomical Texts. The first volume dealt exclusively with these star charts, which they called star clocks. The basic layout of a star clock went something like this. The underside of the coffin lid had a series of rows and columns. The columns represented weeks of the year, and the rows represented hours of the night. Through the center of each coffin was a row of hieroglyphics called the offering spell. This evoked specific stellar gods and offered them beer and bread in thanks for accepting the deceased into their presence. This was crossed by a column with drawings of 4 major astronomical gods: Nut, the goddess of the night sky; the foreleg of Set; Sa, which is the constellation Orion; and Sopdet, the star Sirius, who is the leader of the Decans. This chart looks kind of confusing, but if you examine it closely, it's actually pretty easy to figure out. Each box contains a star glyph and the name of that star in hieroglyphics. The first column shows the day and hour of that star's heliacal rise. Then the star moves diagonally up the chart, showing the movement of the star over the course of the year in relation to the other stars. Neugebauer and Parker believed the Middle Kingdom coffin lids recorded the actual movements of real stars through the night sky. They theorized that the Egyptian star priests could tell the hour of the night by using these charts, and thus called them star clocks. But there was a problem. A few problems, actually. The biggest hole in their theory is that none of the coffin lids are identical. Imagine trying to tell time using a clock that has mixed up numbers and no hands on it. Rather than admit their theory might be wrong, Neugebauer and Parker assumed the scribes who created these charts must have made mistakes. Lots of mistakes. So many mistakes, in fact, that these 2 Western scientists would have to correct their errors by creating an ideal version of these star charts, against which all other star charts would be compared. If these 2 scientists had taken the time to translate the rest of the hieroglyphics on the coffins, they would have quickly discovered that each coffin was unique, and the artwork was created specifically for the person inside the box. If we examine the star charts as individualized works intended for a specific person, then the ideal chart suggested by Neugebauer and Parker quickly falls apart. For example, no 2 star charts have the same number of columns and rows, and none of them have the same sequence of stars. Furthermore, they all have some stars out of place from where one might expect to find them if these charts were simply tracking the movements of stars. Neugebauer and Parker considered these variations to be mistakes. But there's a new theory that these charts show a specific pattern of stars over a course of time in the life of the deceased. You might think of them as a reverse natal chart, recreating an astrological pattern. Tomb art and coffin art was intended to recreate things from the life of the deceased that would then be enjoyed by them in the afterlife. These star charts recreate an astrological pattern of stars that was over the head of the deceased while they were alive in the night sky. And now, by placing it on the lid of a coffin, they would continue to have that same starry night sky over their head in the afterlife.